Beacon Press Audio presents Conflagration, How the Transcendentalists Sparked the American Struggle for Racial, Gender, and Social Justice by John A. Buehrens. This audiobook is narrated by Jeff Zinn, published by Beacon Press Audio, 2019. Introduction. Grandchildren of the Revolution. Many of us first met the Transcendentalists in literature classes in high school or college. This gives us the impression that we should think of them primarily as writers. We read some Emerson, a few poems and essays, probably including Self-Reliance. Thoreau's Walden, about going to the woods to live more deliberately, is now the most read American book written before the Civil War. We then come to see Transcendentalists as centered in rural Concord, asserting their individualism against the demands of society. Perhaps it does not help that our meeting with them often comes in our own adolescence, when the drive to self-differentiation, individuation, and idealism is natural. History provides another perspective, focused less on their writings than on their lives and deeds. Many Transcendentalists and their followers were also fervent activists, sparking the intellectual, spiritual, moral, and political struggle in America for racial, gender, social, and environmental justice that continues to this day. They also were far more religious and urban than most people realize. This is because history also has a tendency to erase many lives and the places associated with them. Here we will lift up less well-known Transcendentalists who were courageous in challenging tradition and injustice. Rather than being pushed around by history, they were great souls who instead tried to shape it toward a more just, hopeful future. The Transcendentalists truly did change American history. Many were grandchildren of leaders in the first American Revolution. Emerson's grandfather, from the old manse in Concord, watched it all begin at the old North Bridge. Theodore Parker's grandfather, Captain John Parker, led the Minutemen on the town common in Lexington that same morning of April 19th, 1775. Both Emerson and Parker were peace-loving ministers, yet like most Transcendentalists, they gradually came to realize that ending slavery in America was a moral imperative that would require the conflagration, strife, and sacrifice of a second American Revolution. They refused to obey the Fugitive Slave Act. Parker even backed that most radical, violent white abolitionist, John Brown. Frederick Douglass, by then America's most articulate and famed fugitive slave, foresaw that Brown's plan to start a slave insurrection would fail, yet he agreed with Parker's call for a second American Revolution. In a speech he gave in May 1857, in response to the Dred Scott decision, he quoted verses that he had written earlier that year. "The fire thus kindled may be revived again. The flames are extinguished, but the embers remain. One terrible blast may produce an ignition, which shall wrap the whole South in wild conflagration." Emerson and Thoreau helped to make Brown the Christ-like martyr whose death might make even civil war redemptive if it resulted in ending slavery. When that war came, some Transcendentalists surprised even themselves by organizing the greatest humanitarian relief effort in American history to that date. They sometimes presented themselves as coming to their convictions out of their own immediate inspiration. Yet to understand them properly, we would do well to begin the story of the Transcendentalists with their wisest, most courageous teachers and mentors. Carl Charles Follen and William Ellery Channing were among the most important. The former was a German-born radical and émigré turned Unitarian minister and abolitionist. He taught at Harvard from 1825 to 1835 bringing to his teaching of future Unitarian ministers a direct connection to the transcendental ethics and German idealism then stirring among them. When Harvard fired him for being an abolitionist, Channing mentored him into the ministry and made him his personal representative in anti-slavery circles. When he died in January 1840, in the conflagration of the steamer Lexington on Long Island Sound, that tragedy became, in retrospect, almost a prophetic sign for the nation as a whole. A ship laden with slave-picked cotton, steaming ahead, no one steering, toward the conflagration of civil war. Follen's death profoundly influenced the last years of the one spiritual mentor whom all Transcendentalists gladly acknowledged. Dr. Channing, the spiritual founder of American Unitarianism and of liberal theology. Even Emerson referred to Dr. Channing as our bishop. To a degree often overlooked, Transcendentalism was a movement almost entirely within the congregational churches of the Boston area that had become Unitarian. It was a spiritual and moral renewal movement among ministers and laypeople in those churches. It is almost impossible for many readers in our secular culture to realize how influential churches were in mid-19th century America, especially in Boston, the epicenter of its dominant religious culture, although historian Sidney E. Mead once wisely called us the nation with the soul of a church. The Transcendentalist movement called forth efforts to make liberal religion more genuinely democratic and more effective in bringing about the many reforms needed to make society more democratic as well. Channing was not only a mentor to Follen, and to almost all the Transcendentalist ministers, but also to lay reformers such as Dorothea Dix in her crusade for decent care of the mentally ill, and Horace Mann in his work to promote high-quality, tax-supported public education for all. Perhaps Channing's closest spiritual disciple, at least in her own mind, was Elizabeth Palmer Peabody. She considered him the true founder of Transcendentalism in New England, whether he did or not, since it was he who had introduced her to the writings of Samuel Taylor Coleridge, to the word transcendental, and to a distinction between mere empirical understanding and more transcendent, intuitive reason. Many today regard rural Concord as the geographic center of the Transcendentalist movement. Again, history suggests otherwise. Prosperous Concord has been able to preserve many places associated with Emerson, Thoreau, Alcott, and Hawthorne. Their graves lie along Author's Ridge in Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. The Emerson House, the Old Manse, the Alcott's Orchard House, and Hawthorne's last home, the Wayside, all receive visitors. Walden Pond is a popular state park. In Boston, by contrast, many homes, churches, public halls, and places associated with the social activism of the Transcendentalists simply disappeared as the city grew. Only a few sites still remain. Among the homes, perhaps only Channing's townhouse on Beacon Hill at 83 Mount Vernon Street, and across the Common at 13 West Street, the shell of what was once the home and bookstore of Elizabeth Peabody. If Transcendentalism had a geographic center, it was surely there. To 13 West Street, the literati and reformers came not only to peruse, buy, or borrow avant-garde literature from Europe, but also to meet, converse, argue, and organize. In the Peabody parlor, Margaret Fuller held many of her famous conversations for women that sparked the American struggle for gender equity. Other discussions Peabody supported had to do with applying what she called the social principle in religion to economic inequality and the many urban social problems it brought. George and Sophia Ripley left Boston in April.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?